Have you ever seen a moment so unexpected that it flipped the power dynamic in an entire room within seconds? That was exactly what happened on a Thursday afternoon inside the pristine, echoing walls of Hawthorne Academy of Classical Dance, a place where the air itself seemed to belong only to the privileged. 12-year-old Amara Johnson sat in her usual spot, a worn backpack at her feet, her dark curls tied in a messy bun. She wasn't wearing a leotard, point shoes, or even leggings like the other girls. Instead, she had on an old t-shirt and faded jeans. Her mother, Clarissa Johnson, was on the other side of the room, scrubbing the mirrors with a bucket of vinegar water and a frayed rag. To most people here, Clarissa was invisible, a black cleaning lady who showed up every afternoon to make sure the mirrors gleamed and the floor shone. And to most people here, Amara was nothing more than the maid's chubby daughter, a silent shadow who sat quietly after school until her mother's shift ended. But that day, the silence broke. "Hey, Amara, want to dance with us?" Sienna Langford's voice rang out, dripping with false sweetness. Sienna, with her golden hair in a perfect bun and point shoes imported from France, was the unofficial queen bee of the Academy's elite class. Her best friend Chloe Whitmore stifled a laugh. "Oh, come on, Sienna. She probably knows all the steps just from watching us, right?" The other girls, all daughters of doctors, judges, and CEOs, giggled in unison. It wasn't an invitation. It was bait, and I could feel it even just picturing the scene. This wasn't about including Amara. This was about entertainment at her expense. Clarissa, still bent over the mirror, froze for a second. Her rag pressed harder into the glass. I imagined she had heard that tone 1,000 times in her life. The kind that sounds like an open door, but is actually a trap. "How about," Sienna added, her voice turning sharp, "you try the Swan Lake sequence we've been working on? You know, the one with the 32 fouettés. That's a killer, even for us." Amara looked up slowly. She met Sienna's blue-eyed stare, then Chloe's smirk, and then glanced at the semicircle of perfect ballerinas who had formed around her. And this is where most kids, especially someone used to being mocked, would have laughed it off, shaken their head, and gone back to staring at the floor. But not Amara. "Okay," she said simply, pushing herself up from the chair. "I swear, if you could bottle the disbelief in that room and sell it, you'd make millions." Every girl there thought she was about to witness the most humiliating moment of Amara's life. The whispering started immediately. "She's serious? She's gonna fall on the first turn. Oh, I'm definitely filming this." Chloe already had her phone out, flipping to camera mode, ready to catch every stumble. Clarissa's gaze followed her daughter's movements. Something in her eyes shifted, like she'd just seen a spark she recognized. I imagine she must have remembered all those early mornings when the studio was empty, and she let Amara step barefoot onto the polished floor. Back then, there were no sneers, no mocking eyes, just a mother passing down the knowledge she had learned from her own mother in Trinidad, fusing classical lines with the rhythm of her island roots. But the girls surrounding Amara didn't know any of that. To them, this was a game. "All right," Sienna said in a mock official tone. "If you can do at least 10 fouettés without falling, we'll be impressed," she smirked. "And if you can't," Chloe jumped in, "then you promise not to sit here pretending you belong in our world anymore." That right there, that's the cruelty people rarely talk about. It's not always a push or a shout. Sometimes it's a subtle exile, a way of erasing someone completely. Amara didn't flinch. She stepped to the center of the studio, barefoot, her plain shirt hanging loose around her frame. And that's when something started to change. Her back straightened, her shoulders aligned. She lifted her chin, not in arrogance, but in focus. The kind of focus that doesn't care who's watching. I can picture Clarissa now, rag in hand, standing completely still, watching her daughter like a hawk. Because she knew what was about to happen. She had seen that posture before. The nights when Amara's feet bled from practicing spins on the cold wooden floor. The mornings when she drilled turns until she was dizzy, learning to pull her balance from somewhere deep inside. Amara took a slow breath and said, just loud enough for them to hear, 32 fouettés. The girls laughed again, but it wasn't as confident as before. She began. The first turn, controlled, the second smooth, the third stronger. Each rotation carried weight, like every spin had a story laced into it. By the time she hit the 10th, the room had gone eerily quiet. Phones were still recording, but the girls holding them weren't smirking anymore. From across the room, Clarissa's lips trembled. Every spin was a memory. Buying those worn point shoes from a thrift shop, teaching her daughter to use her hips to center her balance, telling her, don't dance to impress them, baby. Dance to speak to something bigger than them. 15 fouettés. 16. 17. Sienna's arms slowly dropped from her folded pose. Chloe's phone began to shake in her hands, not from laughter, but from something that felt uncomfortably like awe. By the time Amara hit 20, the mocking had evaporated. By 25, I think every girl there realized they were seeing something they'd never forget. And yet, Amara didn't stop. Her eyes didn't dart to check who was watching. She wasn't performing for them. She was dancing through them, past their prejudice, past their whispered insults, past the years of being the maid's daughter. When she hit 30, a strange thing happened. The girls stopped being her judges and started being her witnesses, and she still had 2 more turns to go. 31, 32. Amara's final fouetté landed with such precision that it was as if the floor itself had been waiting for her. She didn't wobble. She didn't gasp for breath. She simply placed her foot down with a calm grace, her arms folding softly at her chest like a period at the end of a sentence that no one dared interrupt. The silence in Hawthorne Academy's main studio was thick, not the polite kind that follows a performance, but the kind that comes when something completely rewires your understanding of what's possible. Sienna's lips parted, but no words came out. Chloe's phone was still pointed at Amara, but the once smug camera woman now looked like she just filmed evidence of a miracle. And here's the thing about moments like this. They feel slow, like you can see every flicker of realization crossing people's faces. I imagine the thought process in that room went something like this. She's the maid's kid. She's overweight. She's never trained, followed by a mental shattering of every assumption they just clung to. 45, Amara said quietly. The girls blinked. What? I can do 45 fouettés, she clarified, if you still want me to prove it. Sienna actually laughed, but it was a nervous, thin sound. You're bluffing. Clarissa stepped forward now, her cleaning rag still in hand, eyes locked on her daughter. Do it, baby, she said softly. And Amara did. She spun again, faster this time, her skirt flaring slightly with each rotation. Every turn was sharper, more deliberate. You could feel that she wasn't just showing off skill. She was channeling every late-night practice session, every whispered insult at school, every moment she'd been overlooked. 10, 15, 20, and the room wasn't breathing anymore. Even the air seemed frozen, like the walls themselves didn't dare creak. By the 30th, Chloe's camera hand had gone completely still. By the 40th, one of the younger girls in the back had tears in her eyes, and not the mocking kind. This was the kind of crying you do when something shifts inside you, when you realize the world is bigger than you thought. When she landed her 45th fouetté, the sound of her foot meeting the floor felt final, like a door slamming shut on every prejudice in that room. I can't lie. If I had been there, I'd have stood up and clapped until my hands hurt. But in that moment, no one clapped. They just stared. Where did you learn that? Sienna's voice was small now, stripped of its power. Amara tilted her head toward her mother. She taught me. Clarissa stepped forward, and for the first time that afternoon, she wasn't just a cleaning lady. She was a teacher, a keeper of tradition, a mother who had turned an empty studio into a stage for her child's potential. I learned from my mother, Clarissa added, her voice steady, and she learned from hers. 3 generations of dancers. No trophies, no private lessons. Just rhythm, heart, and discipline. That hit harder than any insult they'd thrown earlier. Sienna looked like she'd swallowed something bitter. Chloe lowered her phone, staring at the screen as if trying to process the fact that she had just recorded something extraordinary. And here's the twist life loves to throw in. Chloe had intended to post that video online as a joke, but now I could already see the idea forming in her head. This wasn't just a clip anymore. This was a story. From the back of the studio, a new voice cut through the tension. What on earth is going on here? It was Ms. Rosalind Hart, the Academy's director, standing in the doorway with her briefcase still in hand. Her eyes scanned the room, taking in the circle of stunned girls, the cleaning lady standing beside her daughter, and the girl in the center who still hadn't broken a sweat. When she heard someone murmur, 45 fouettés, Ms. Hart actually dropped her bag. 45? She repeated as if the number itself might be lying. She stepped forward, her eyes narrowing on Amara. Show me. There was no hesitation. Amara moved to fifth position, drew in a deep breath, and began again. 1, 2, 3. By the 20th, Miss Hart's jaw had gone slack. By the 40th, she was holding her hand to her chest. When Amara hit 45 and stopped with perfect control, the director exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for minutes. This, Ms. Hart's voice trembled. This is not normal. This is exceptional, and it cannot be wasted. She turned to Clarissa. You will get her into our advanced program immediately. Full scholarship, private training, competition entries, whatever she needs. The girls who had mocked Amara minutes ago were now watching her as if they were seeing her for the first time. Not the maid's daughter, not the chubby girl in old sneakers, but a dancer, one who had just crushed every social rule they'd been taught to believe in. And in that moment, I think everyone in that room learned something they'd never forget. Real talent doesn't ask for permission. By the time Amara and Clarissa stepped out of the studio that evening, Chloe had already uploaded the video. The title, 12-year-old from nowhere stuns elite dance academy with 45 fouettés. It wasn't sarcastic. It wasn't mocking. It was a tribute. I can picture Chloe's fingers hesitating over the keyboard before she hit post. The same girl who had been smirking minutes before was now proud, maybe even a little ashamed of herself. But the moment had moved her enough to share it with the world, and the world noticed. By the next morning, the video had over 2 million views. Comments poured in. She moves like she's telling a story. This is raw talent. That girl just redefined what I thought ballet was. Shame on anyone who ever underestimated her. Even professional dancers were sharing the clip. One from the American Ballet Theater tweeted, "Who is this girl? Get her on a stage." Inside Hawthorne Academy, everything shifted. The girls who used to pass Amara without a glance now stopped her in the hallway. Sienna, who had been the ringleader of the mockery, approached her during lunch. Not with insults, but with something Amara had never heard from her before. "I'm sorry." Amara didn't smile. She didn't need to. She simply said, "I know." And in that quiet response, there was no bitterness, just truth. Within a week, Ms. Hart had announced the Amara Johnson Scholarship, dedicated to finding and funding talented dancers from underprivileged backgrounds. Clarissa was offered a salaried position as a cultural dance instructor, teaching Caribbean and African-inspired movement alongside the classical curriculum. The Academy's walls, once lined with photographs of only fair-skinned, slender ballerinas in identical white tutus, began to change. New photos appeared, dancers of different body types, skin colors, and styles, each celebrated for their unique artistry. 3 months later, Amara stood on stage at the National Junior Ballet Championship. The same girl who had been called out as a joke now performed in front of a panel of judges who whispered to each other in disbelief as she spun, not just executing flawless technique, but infusing every move with a pulse that came from somewhere deeper. When the announcer called her name as the national champion, the applause was deafening. Cameras flashed. Clarissa's face was streaked with tears. And here's my favorite part. After accepting her trophy, Amara turned to the crowd and said into the microphone, "To anyone watching who's ever been told they don't belong, you do. And when they doubt you, don't just prove them wrong, show them why they were never right in the first place." The audience rose to its feet. Even the other competitors clapped with genuine admiration. But the real turning point came a year later. Amara was invited to the International Young Dancers Gala in Paris as the youngest performer in the event's history. The girl who once sat in the corner of the studio waiting for her mom to finish cleaning now stood under the golden lights of the Palais Garnier, spinning into history. Critics called her performance the perfect marriage of classical discipline and soulful storytelling. One review even said, "She doesn't just dance, she converses with the music." Back home, her viral video had surpassed 50 million views. It was being used in dance schools worldwide, not just to teach fouettés, but to teach humility, respect, and the danger of underestimating someone based on appearances. In Hawthorne Academy, it would never be the same again. The culture of exclusion had been replaced with something better, a place where a janitor's daughter could share the same stage as a senator's child, and where different was no longer whispered as an insult, but celebrated as an advantage. I think about that first day often, how a circle of sneering girls turned into a ring of witnesses for one of the most powerful moments in that studio's history. How a child, armed with nothing but preparation and pride, dismantled years of unspoken prejudice with 45 spins. And every time I watch that video, I remember the last thing Amara said before walking off the stage in Paris. Talent has no price tag, no skin color, and no size. It just needs a chance. That's the kind of truth you can't unhear. And once you see it, you can't unsee it either.